Hello everyone and welcome to yet another video. Today I'm here taking a look at the newly released indie title Imprisoned Light. This game was made by a team of about 15 people and it is their second released game on Steam. In this video I'll talk a bit about the basics of the game, then I'll talk about my general feelings on the whole thing. I'll also make a list of pros and cons, and in the end we'll make a conclusion, and hopefully all of that will help you figure out if the game is worth buying. I have a lot of strong opinions about this game, so let's just get into it, shall we? Imprisoned Light is a 2D class-based action-adventure game with some smaller RPG elements. It has a retro pixelated art style and music reminiscent of the 8-bit era. The game centers around protecting a crystal from waves of enemies. When killing enemies, you'll gain soul points. These points can be used to power up the crystal. Once it is fully powered up, you get to move on to the next level. There are 4 different classes to choose from in this process: Knight, Necromancer, Wizard and Ranger. Each of these classes have one special ability to them and start out with different stats. During a gameplay, you'll be leveling up your character and thereby upgrading your core stats. The game features permadeath, so these upgrades as well as your progress in the game are lost on death. In a nutshell, if you die, you have to start from the very first level on a level 1 character. The game features a total of 50 levels spread out over 5 worlds. The game features 4-player co-op and single player. It's a relatively simple game, so yeah, let's move on. Before proceeding, it's worth noting that I only played the game in single player. The local co-op may be great fun with friends, and feel free to call me an idiot for not taking a look at the full experience, but alas, I still think the single player is the most important part of the game in many ways. After all, if the single player isn't fun, why would you go get more people to play the game with you? With that out of the way, let me just say that I found the game incredibly dull and uninteresting, and there are many reasons for this. Firstly, the combat is so simple it's just silly. You only have one type of attack, which you will be using the entire game. The special attacks are mostly useless since your basic attack will kill pretty much everything in one hit. This would be fine, actually, if the enemies were interesting to fight, but they're not. This leads me to my second point. The game proudly boasts 18 types of enemies, but in reality there are only 2 types. The ones that walk towards your crystal and the ones that fly towards your crystal. The rest are just reskins of these 2 types. They may be slightly bigger and they may look a bit scarier, but fighting them feels exactly the same. This makes the game really uninteresting after a while. Sure, you can change the background, the music and the skins of the enemies, but that does not make it more engaging to fight the same enemies throughout the entire game. Thirdly, there's also a huge problem with the difficulty in this game. The first 20 minutes of gameplay are frankly piss easy. Even the first time you play through it, that's the case. The difficulty eventually spikes to higher levels later on. This actually makes the game halfway fun at times, especially when you have to defend several crystals at once. But to be honest, most players have either fallen asleep or quit out of boredom by that point. So yeah, that is a bit of a problem. Lastly, I want to talk about my biggest pet peeve with Imprisoned Light: the permadeath. Permadeath has become a very popular thing in indie games the last couple of years. It works incredibly well in games like FTL, Risk of Rain and The Binding of Isaac. It is honestly a very useful game mechanic if used properly. In those previously mentioned games, it adds replayability because each death does not feel like a total loss. The various unlocks that you get in each run keeps the game feeling fresh. In Imprisoned Light, you lose all character progress on death. The only thing you get to keep are the unlocks on throwing weapons. These weapons are pretty much all the same and aren't significant enough to matter. As a result, a death feels like a total loss. It also does not help that the levels in Imprisoned Light are not randomly generated, meaning that you have to replay the exact same levels every time. This alone makes the prospect of starting a new game irritating. This game honestly should either implement a live system or just add a level selector. Permadeath really adds nothing to the experience. Now at this point you might assume that I hate everything about this game, and that's not actually true. There are actually a few things I want to praise the game for. It's clear that a lot of love and effort went into the art design of the game. The enemies all look interesting and you instantly know what they're supposed to be. The same goes for the player characters and the world backgrounds. A lot of love has been put in and it really shows. The soundtrack is also really fitting and adds a certain charm to the game. Sadly, these things can't save the game from being below average no matter how hard they try. Now let's move on and look at the pros and cons of the game. Let's start out a bit positive and firstly talk about the good things this game has to offer. Imprisoned Light definitely has a good soundtrack and it also has a good art direction. It is clear that a lot of work was put into these areas. It is a shame that this kind of effort was not put into the rest of the game. It's also why there's no more things on this list. These are basically the only 2 things I could find that I wanted to praise the game for, because the rest of the game is, well, let's just take a look at the list of things that aren't so great about the rest of the game. Imprisoned Light suffers from a few major problems. The combat becomes boring fast, the enemies are boring to fight, the permadeath serves no purpose, and the difficulty is too low. I could nitpick way more problems out of this game, but these are the major ones. Now that I've told you the pros and cons, let's move on to my conclusion on the game. Throughout my time with Imprisoned Light, I did have fun every now and then. It's not a completely incompetent game, and there definitely is worse games out there. It is a functioning experience, and you can tell the developers actually made an effort, and that is at least worth considering. All that being said, I can't personally recommend the game in its current state. The problems are too severe, and there isn't enough substance to keep you invested. But I am confident that if the developers actually take this as a learning experience, their next game will be good, maybe even great. If you still want to check out the game, there will be a link to the Steam page below. If you liked the video, feel free to leave a like, and if you really loved it, I also have a subscribe button. I really hope to see you all in the next video. Bye!